Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the Walker Arts Center. I'm very pleased actually to welcome both you and tonight's guest, David Adjaye, to the Walker Arts Center. My name is Andrew Blauvelt. I'm the design director and curator of architecture and design. I should actually say welcome back to David because he was able to join us for the opening reception for the Kara Walker exhibition that was here in February that we were both reminiscing about. That's really amazing. If you didn't get to see it here, you can see it in New York now. So it's already old news in New York, so we like that when when something comes out of Minneapolis first. I would also like to thank Target for their ongoing support of the Walker Arts Center, in particular for Target Free Thursday Nights, which of course is tonight, and in particular their support for Drawn Here, which is our lecture series about art and architecture and design in Minnesota. I would also like to thank Wingfield Corporation for their generous support and assistance in making David's visit to the Twin Cities possible. And in fact, I'd like to extend a particular thanks to Dean Johnson at Wingfield, who, as a St. Paul booster, unlike any other I've met, has really helped, has a really amazing vision for that city. And as a former resident, I actually am one of the few people to live in Minneapolis and in St. Paul. I'm quite, I know, I think I'm the only one. No one told me I couldn't do it but when I moved here. So I've actually enjoyed both parts of the river and both downtowns, and I think that's just incredibly exciting, that Dean's vision for the city. And now for our introduction. While David's work has been on my radar screen for several years, 2007 seems to be his year. Just a week or so ago, David saw the opening of his first art museum design, actually, and its first public building in America, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver. An exhibition of his work, David Adjaye Making Public Buildings, which opened at the Whitechapel Gallery in London, has traveled to the Studio Museum in Harlem and New York, among many other venues. In fact, it's on tour now. His second monograph of the same title was published by Thames and Hudson, available outside for purchase. And another exhibition, which actually I was able to see, which I was very grateful to see, was called African Cities, which opened at the Harvard Graduate School of Design and explores David's interest in the architecture of the continent, the legacy of tropical modernism, and the vernacular practices of indigenous habitation. In June, David was awarded the Order of the British Empire, which I thought was just a good way to end your year, but that was in June. I first became aware of David's work through his inventive designs for private residences, with evocative titles such as Electra House, Dirty House, Lost House, Bar House, and Sunken House. Such works point to the highly contingent nature of their sites and spatial circumstances. They also speak to the potential transformation that is wrought through David's use of unique materials, spatial composition, and interplay of light and shadow. In his ever-extending portfolio of projects, the most recent chapter involves the creation of civic buildings, or to rephrase the title of his latest book, he's making buildings public. David's civic buildings, which range from public libraries, performing arts centers, and multi-residential housing developments to marketplaces and community centers, actively explore and provisionally answer his own question: what is a public building in the 21st century? A seemingly straightforward query, but one that requires great agility to navigate the competing demands of various constituencies. Given such challenges, what is remarkable is that David has been able to realize buildings that retain an architectural clarity that one critic has likened to that of an artist. And I believe he meant that as a compliment. This, too, is a fitting analogy, since he frequently collaborates with artists such as Olafur Eliasson, with whom he created a pavilion to house the light installation Your Black Horizon, which debuted in conjunction with the 2005 Venice Biennale, as well as with artists such as Chris O'Feely, who created a dazzling wall mural for Adjaye's Nobel Peace Center in Oslo. Whether a private residence, community center, art museum, or public library, David's work explores the dualities of public and private, responding to the urban complexities of diverse sites and cultures, which has been central to his growing body of work. It is therefore fitting that Adjaye's latest project is a proposed new hotel and private residences and multi-use spaces planned for downtown St. Paul, which I hope we'll see tonight. Please help me welcome David Adjaye.
Thank you. It's really great to be in the Twin Cities, and It's very nice to be in the Walker talking, and we've sort of known about each other and have kind of crossed paths for a long time. So it's very nice to kind of finally make this happen. I wanted to really just go through the two themes that have been just been mentioned. That in the work, which started really at the beginning of 2000, really, in real terms, that's when sort of the key competitions were won, and the sort of practice sort of increased size and started to engage in much more civic work. I want to talk about the completion of those projects, but also to talk about the ongoing concerns about the notion of the domestic realm or the private realm, and an idea which I've been exploring since doing my first sort of private house, this idea of maybe trying to rediscover a notion of retreat in the city as an essential quality of residential projects, and much more increased public engagement, public porosity with the public buildings. So in a way to try and isolate more this idea of the home, and to dissolve more the idea of the institution. I'm going to sort of flip through projects which look at private and public, and hopefully through different scales and different contexts, which will hopefully give you a sort of sonography of the work so far. I'm going to start with most of the projects are in London. We're starting to work, thankfully, in different parts of the world, but up to now, most of the work has been in London. So this is a kind of if you're not familiar with London, this is going to be a little excursion into not the centre, but the sort of periphery of London, the bits that you probably don't get to visit if you're just going for a few days. Camden, we start with Camden, which is where King's Cross is. This is King's Cross, which is probably now going to become one of the biggest construction sites in Europe. This whole area here is being master planned as the new sort of interchange for the Eurostar, which connects the UK to Europe. This is the umbilical cord, and this is going to be the new hub, which is going to, I think, radically alter the gravity of the city, and the notion of the center of the city. This is very close to Soho. Soho's down here, so in a way, there's this new sort of quality of the city which is going to emerge. Anyway, there was, about 5 years ago, there was a frenzy in this area when the plans were understood that this was going to change, to really take hold of this area, which traditionally has always been, in sort of famous films and things, and just historically, an area where the sort of fringe activities of the city gathered, lots of prostitutions, drugs, etc. It's a really hard area, transitory area, and one which has radically changed in the last few years to becoming a sort of up-and-coming, gentrified space, really, with luxury apartments appearing right around this entire station. And the station's now being rebuilt. Just behind it, King's Cross is interesting because essentially it's a nexus where you see all the layers of the infrastructure that the city's made. This is obviously being London's first important infrastructure, the canal system, which linked the sort of city to the mills in the north. These are the buildings that were built to kind of store the goods. These are now these treasured and valued sort of workspaces and condos. And my project sort of is at one of these junctions of stations here. This is one of those canal basins which has been converted, and a site here. This is a mill building here. And my clients were incredibly intuitively smart. basically bought a loading bay of a big industrial building. And I don't know if you know about London, but London we have a very stringent planning structure. So just because you buy land doesn't necessarily mean you are able to build. So they were taking a big risk buying this piece of property, which is basically a road between a building, and hoped that they could get planning permission. The study was what they wanted to do was to make, my client's a fashion designer, a very well-known fashion designer in London, and her husband, and they wanted the space to be both a new type of public room for them to entertain, to show the collections, and for it to be their home and studio. So it's this new type of mixed-use sort of life that is very present in all metropolitan places and very kind of explicitly kind of sort of happening. You know, this idea of apartments in London is a very new thing, and it's becoming something that's becoming incredibly strong as a new topology in the city. Anyway, the idea in this project is that this site more or less has very little light. So the project really has to collect light from above. And that essentially, if that's the plan up there, this receives as much light as possible. This is a little bit of space underneath the existing building, and then obviously the darker zone is at the end. And the strategy here was to not do a sort of traditional modernist thing of trying to kind of reflect light everywhere and trying to kind of lighten the space, but to actually work with what is the perceived negative quality of the space and to transform that into a specific quality for the project. So we wanted to work with this idea of a space from which is where darkness is articulated as a kind of as the structure, the strategy for the space, and that light is sculpted as form in the space, which kind of gives definition to it. So to kind of do a reverse of what you traditionally do. I'll just quickly go through sections, but essentially we inserted this form which half sits. This is the new bit which is filled in, and then this is a sort of an insertion, but it's put in at the very end as a pool. This is the private sleeping area, and then this is the public room. So this is that building. It has an extension put on it for these condos, and this is the driveway. And we made just a screen which could be planted as the announcement of that. This is the street. This is just when the project was finished, but that's the arch there. It's double-ended, so it has two entrances to it. One which facilitates the studios, and this is a sort of a more sort of discrete private entrance. And then you're looking at the front elevation, and what you think you're looking at is a view in, but actually what you're looking at is yourself, because that is a mirror-tinted wall which reflects you back to you. So you're looking at the light and you're looking at the reflection of the city, but there's a kind of this immediate idea about what you think you're seeing and what you're not seeing starts right at the beginning of the project. When you move through the project, there are a series of light wells. When you come through the front door and you move into this space, and you're in a kaleidoscope of three light shafts. The front one, which we looked at, the central one, which has a water court, and then the end one, which has a maple in the back. So you have these three elements diagonally straddling the space. And this kind of choreographs the way in which the space is used. The studios are at the back, the living rooms at the front, barbecue and sort of outdoor room here, kitchens and snug in this area. And then this area that we're looking at is the sleeping area that connects. So this is in that first court. This is a 4.5 meter space. So these very large glass plates, and then mirror is used at the roof edge to kind of maximize the reflectivity of light, and also to act as a kind of kaleidoscopic device, which also kind of gives you the views. It's the only moment we have any kind of aspect is really through these mirrors, which collects the kind of elevations of the other buildings and brings them into the space. The building is made out of recycled laminated timber. We try to basically say that this is a project where we would not use any material that had a sort of expense to it except for glass. So it's all very cheap laminated materials which are stained very different shades of dark grey and black. There's one major piece of furniture which is in the space. My clients didn't want to buy furniture, so I've been doing residential projects where systematically I've been making what I call unfurniture pieces, and I've started casting furniture permanently into these residential spaces, which seems extremely perverse, but seems to be a sort of tendency against the kind of plethora of choices to sort of, my clients were asking me to kind of stop the choices and to make a piece of architecture which works with the space. So I've been developing these architectural furniture pieces which can never go anywhere, can only exist in these homes. Very heavy, you can't take it with you. In this piece, it becomes a massive aperture, so I'll talk about it in a bit. But anyway, the central atrium, water court. The floors are resin, so you get a polyurethane resin with the water, which just diffuses, blurs the whole thing. This is that main central court. then the kitchen. You see that element coming through? This piece is made as a single casting, a sort of single cast piece of furniture, which becomes kitchen, breakfast table, storage, and sofa as an armature, which sort of defines the public space, as it were. Then the studio's at the back, and this is this sort of planting space before the tree started growing, and it's growing very slowly but very beautifully. But it's in the darkest part of the site. But in a way, it has this kind of incredible quality. Then the studio up above. And then the snug for watching movies, which is the one moment where the old character of the building is revealed. This is basically the loading bay platform, which I wanted to show in the section that we clad. So this is where trucks would dock against, and we just kind of opened that up as a space, which is basically a little movie space, a little daybed, which is sort of reading, sleeping space. So back and then into this is that front door that we came through, and into the bedrooms. Bedrooms become these two spaces which are basically lined in, it's the color fields, and this idea of color fields in space sort of recur in all the projects, with this window which collects light from the light scoops, the sort of light wells. Then it's the second bedroom. They're basically, the carpets and walls, there are 7 different shades of this color sort of modulated around this space. This is the bedroom, main bedroom space. And this window collects all the light and view. And then this is a view to the pool, which is behind this, and that's that corridor we went through. And shower room, of course, normal, but the shower room leads onto this, which is the pool, and that's the cutout. So you progressively move into this, the absolute end of the site. And you swim and see the color and see back to the light well, and then to that front entrance. And that's the light, and then that's the roof. So this is what does everything, this is an architecture that's lost. That's why we call this a lost house. It's in a way the house is just about these lenses which animate and create all its aspect and its light. Okay, then we'll move to a public project. This is probably the first most important public project that I made, which is in an incredible part of London, which is changing again, also incredibly fast. This is Whitechapel. You can see the main avenue, which is Whitechapel High Street, and it's an old Roman road, which becomes a main highway. It's very close to this, which is the heart of the city. So this is right on the river, Tower Bridge, looking back at the engine of the city, the regrowth of the city. And this is the presence of the city in relationship to Whitechapel, that road I was talking about. And Whitechapel is a famous neighborhood for, it's been a kind of always traditionally a part of London, which again had the creative arts sort of situating themselves. So there were lots of theatre performers here, and lots of sort of edge, fringe activity outside of the city wall here. It's where people like Christopher Wren based his studio, lived here, and in sort of now Gilbert and George and a myriad of artists, Tracy Emin, Chris O'Feely, all the sort of YBAs that live in this area. And it's always traditionally been the place where immigrants coming to London would settle first, get work, employment, and as they moved into second generation, they would move out to the suburbs. So it's always had this quality, this incredible melting pot quality. This is how the street, it's always been a sort of market street, this main road, and at this time what's been fascinating is how the street is really a kind of hard place. Let's see, it's really about this double sort of dual carriageway, but how the markets basically establish a wall, an acoustic and sort of visual wall to the street, so that when you're in it, you're in that space, which is this, and in a way kind of creates this natural sort of a sort of passeggiata for the community, a place of meeting and encounter, a sort of totally made sort of public realm, and where you see all the communities, from the Huguenots, so the Jewish community, the working sort of English communities, the Bangladeshi community, Ethiopian. There are 15 languages formally and sort of recorded by the borough that are spoken actively in this area, and it's probably more. This is where the borough of Tower Hamlets wanted to build what is essentially a new typology that they wanted to work with. This idea of basically in London, the infrastructure of the civic infrastructure was built, or the last kind of redoing of that was built in the turn of the century, 19th century buildings. These neighborhoods, London is a kind of collection of villages and neighborhoods which sort of have their own centers, which come together to form the city, all had their sort of hearts planned. You would have the civic space, the library, the fire engine, the fire station, the bathhouses, etc. And libraries are usually in those contexts. What's happened is that with the 20th century and sort of shifting patterns of economics, these centers have moved and new economics sort of zones have sort of appeared and shifted the sort of emphasis of the old city plans. So in a way, this is one of those moments where the idea of then rethinking what public institutions are and where they are became important. This idea that actually the architecture of the building, the economics doesn't follow the building. The buildings have to follow the economics, and the economics are kind of radically shifting and changing the shape of the city, and that maybe public buildings needed to track that. So this is an opportunity where this is a brand called Sainsbury's, which is a kind of food brand in London, a very famous food brand in the UK, was given one of the last large in-town sort of plates, which really need large car parking spaces. We don't have sort of shopping centres with car parking spaces. That was something that was turned against in terms of planning policy about 10 years ago. But this is one of the last ones that was built, and as a trade with the city, this site on the main street was given by the client for a community project. So that's where this building is the sort of flagship building for the model. The model is really to combine adult education services, which is basically anything after school, from motor mechanics, flower arranging to aromatherapy, anything that's sort of taught with traditional library services and community sort of facilities. They were called idea stores. This was a kind of radical project for me. This is the first public project that I won. And I basically, the premise of the project was to kind of reimagine, for me, this notion of a new landscape, a new stitched, woven community, this idea of difference as a new network, and to really kind of go back to traditional ideas about which in ancient cultures, and also the Greeks were very strong about this idea of the city as a woven fabric of different parts which stitch very closely, imbricate together, and that actually maybe a public building could sort of synthesize this strategy and also kind of manifest sort of specific qualities that are present and already happening. The project really attempts to take away the front door of an institution. It attempts to take away the foyer, the grand space, the civic space, to move away from the notion of the public institution as a palace, as a grand palace, but to move it into an idea of more or less being a piece of infrastructure, an extension of the street or the public realm. The project really is about a form, a volume which we're given in terms of area, which sets up two scenarios: a large volume which faces the street, and a smaller pavilion which faces the back parking space. It's designed so that all its servicing, it's basically a green building. It's basically uses no ducts. It's basically cast concrete plenum system with a sort of evaporative cooling air sprite system, and then basically this whole volume is clad in glass, not for transparency, yes, but also to act as a device for acting as a solar chimney, which collects. This is south-facing, and we didn't want louvers on this facade, so to act as a chimney which draws heat up and discharges it and allows the facade to be cool and have vision. The building has 4 entrances, 2 off an escalator which rides up to the project, which is divided into quiet zones on the top 3 floors and louder, more active zones on the bottom 2 floors. 2 on the ground floor and then 2 up this escalator. It's just some elevations. Just take you around the building. So this thing goes, I have to let it go slowly. Then this is the project. It projects over the street, as you'll see, and really collects you directly off that market sort of passage space, just taking you around it. So I just decided recently to start talking about this project within its context much more and less about an object. This is when you start to kind of move underneath it. There's this 4-meter cut from the street level, and this is that south-facing atrium, and sort of encountering that. And then this is it looking back and its relationship to the city. So this is that view that I showed you right at the beginning, and this is this new lamination onto that. So this is that view. This is south, so you get this kaleidoscope of color, which is from the colored glass, which is laminated into the skin. This refers directly to the market, which I'll show you in a bit. But this is that escalator rising up, which takes you to the quieter spots of the store, the idea store, and this is the sort of arrival at that moment. These three levels connect together, and then sort of back down to that sort of street. So you see the reference is directly off the market. The blue and green are the sort of ubiquitous colors of the markets in that neighborhood, and I just wanted to work directly with something which seems frivolous and peripheral, and to really kind of understand that in a kind of the local psyche, this has a kind of very powerful kind of iconography as background iconography, but one which can actually be architecturalized. So that becomes a color fade of 5 greens and blues which wrap around the building. The building also kind of picks up on stratification ideas of the Victorian buildings and sort of punctuation system. So it's a kind of an abstraction of its context. It's a kind of culmination, a strategy which is about a kind of it's a sort of a response rather than a sort of reaction or a sort of proposition. It's a kind of it's really a kind of a reading of the place for me. So as we go around the building, this is the second sort of entry. This is the connection back to the shopping center, and then the routes in. And then that sort of lower level, which is really sort of DVD and surfing spaces, and then sort of internet spaces. There is no front desk, a children's library. This is just at the beginning, so everything's very ordered. It's very messy in here usually. Sorry, let me show that slide. Just the structure. The structure's a moment frame concrete structure, which is expressed. This allows us to heat and cool the building much more effectively. So it's the ribbing is the structure, but also works very well for us acoustically, which means that we don't need sort of acoustic baffles in the space. So the structure's been maximized to deal with a lot of issues, and there's no bracing on the building, so the building has a kind of clean skin. The voids are these laminated glass sort of spaces. All the void spaces in this building are very human scale. I wanted to work basically with a scale which on drawings looks almost insignificant, but at these very tiny sort of apertures, which to the human body are very important sort of relationships. We designed everything because it's a very low budget project. We designed all the lights and structures and got those made in Italy with amazing companies who were incredibly supportive. The wind bracing for the building, we sort of maximized by increasing the fins, which basically deals with wind loads, and added bookstores and all this sort of technical equipment for the library into the facade. The back pavilion is a dance space, recycled paper and sort of laminated timber everywhere, sprung floor space for dance and sort of body. So in a way, the project divides both into mind and body. You have this body space at the back and the mind space at the front. And then there's a terrace. This is a kind of little aromatherapy space, and there's a terrace for, it's a creche on this floor, and this is an outdoor terrace in the summer for kids or for events. Just going to take you through the building. Most of the books line the walls, and where they don't, we developed this curvilinear shelving system which takes the rest of the load, which is not along the walls, and turns it. But the idea was to move it away from a regimented academic library. This is a public library. It's not about academics. It's about the kind of entire spectrum of learning. So in a way, we wanted to turn the idea of books and discovery into a sort of almost like a garden, a landscape that you would sort of discover. These are sort of moments where the teaching spaces are off these spaces here. The escape stairs are all sort of fire glazed so that you always get cross views throughout the building. And then there is no central reading area. All the reading spaces are around the perimeter. So there are sort of about 300 windows around the building, and you choose which view you like. At the top of the building, there's a public room which has the best view, which has its own, these are sort of 6-meter retractable skylights, which open, so this can become an outdoor courtyard in the summer. And it has Wi-Fi, and it's a cafe. And it looks back to the city. And it's the only high point that the public has direct access to see the entire neighborhood in this area. So this is back out through that void. And then just looking at the two pavilions, this is the main mind space and then the body space here. And it's just giving you a sample. I mean, they literally can go through all the windows. This is really the real elevations of this building. The glass is a cladding, but these are the windows that sort of go around the building. And then it's this new infrastructure next to the city. And then from the car park, you see the dance space, which has a window to the car park, and the therapy space and the terrace, and then that's the body space and the mind space. Okay. Then I will just quickly show a project which is my first project in the United States. It's a project for two artists that I've sort of admired for a very, very long time, and I was really touched. It was a great honor to meet them, and it was amazing that they liked my work, and very shortly after meeting them asked me to kind of do a very personal project for them. I sort of in London got a bit of a reputation for making artist studios, so they had seen that and wanted me to create for them their studio. The studio is really a double studio. This is Lorna Simpson, whose work deals with gender and architecture, actually. And then Jim Casabier, who explicitly talks about architectural space, but these are like... Ooh. Sorry. These are... this is like a prison. This is a panoptic prison. So it's this idea of the idea of meaning and architecture, how architecture receives meaning, and what happens when you remove all the signifiers of that meaning. And Jim's work is really powerful and was something that I looked at very early in my studies. Brooklyn, you know, hopefully. I adored my time discovering that part of New York, brownstones, this culture, and I loved this drawing, which is my Brooklyn drawing. And this is really about, what's really beautiful is the kind of imperfection of it, which I really loved. And what I loved is this idea of a rectangle. The site was more or less a kind of little miniature of exactly what was going on in the city. So it's a 125-foot space by 20 foot wide. And the strategy was to make two studios, one above the other, as a house. So in a way, slightly conflicting, but this idea of a double public studio, a double studio as one home, and to use to express the idea of the attic and the base. So this is very much a roof-like space. We didn't have to do this. This is something which was generated to kind of deal with this. And to then deal with this idea of threshold. This is the street here. This is a back garden. To make a screen, a facade as a screen, and then a real facade which is here, which then has these collectors, these windows, which connect back to the screen. You'll see that in a second. And then basically the diagram is very simple. There are three spaces: an office, a making space, and a library or retreat office, sort of quiet space. And the same thing happens here: office, making space, and a retreat. This is just looking back the other way. So you see the two studios, one a sort of perfect rectangle, almost a classical one, and then one a corrupted sort of studio. Then that's the building. So this is made out of, it's a steel frame building wrapped in polypropylene, which is basically a fiber plastic. It's a material that's developed for the transport industry to line trucks, to allow objects to be stored properly. We screen printed the material and then randomized it. And it has this incredible perceptual quality. It looks like fabric really close up. It looks like stone from very far away. But it's a highly insulated plastic. And this is just it's a slide I like very much because it denies you what you always want to see, which is all this articulation, because this project was about finishing this composition on the street, which is a Baptist church, a rectory, and then in the end, a small house which is a pyramid inverted and cut. It plays with this idea. It's a sort of three-dimensional end to that here. And it's really about this fenestration system which moved from the civic to the private. For me, this sums up what the kind of work I'm trying to do. It's public project, private project. I kind of wanted to kind of end it. This is the entry. This is that triple height space which looks back to these collectors, light collectors, and then natural light and artificial light which comes on in the night here. So it's very much a cavernous shaft. Then you come through into the first space, which is Jim's space. It's the little library, quiet room up here. This is Jim's making space. And Jim makes these incredible architectural models and then photographs them. And then he has the connection to the garden. This little library. Then up to Lorna's space. Lorna's office space. This is one of these connectors across the triple height space into the sort of front view. I have to wait for these things to. It's sort of blown up a bit, but basically in Lorna's space, the main space is sort of expanded a bit, but this is kind of the main space. This is, the slide's expanded a bit, maybe the next one. This is the other view of that space. Is basically this piece of furniture here, and then that's the main space for Lorna with this roof. And then this piece of furniture is a system, a second stair which takes you up, and it's a sofa. Lorna works a lot with editing suites, so she has a main window, which you'll see in a second, and a projector, which you sit here and sort of look across to that wall space that we looked at. So as you go up, this is that space, so this is her working space, and this is the space up above looking back, and this is this main window that looks back at the garden and looks back at the rear view as well. And this is her retreat space. Then there's a garden. Garden has an evergreen, and it's a surreal little game. And a horse trough, so guess what's going on. This relates very much to their work. The garden's almost like, gardens are pleasure things. So this is a little private thing, but basically this idea of architecture and flooding. This trough is always flooding, and it's a fountain that's continually flooding, and it refers to Jim. And it's sort of at the end of the space, and back at the end of that you get this elevation where you see the studio, Jim's studio, and then Lorna's studio. And then this is the view from the neighbor, so you see the pyramid really expressed. And that's the rectory and the church. The material wraps around the entire thing, so the roof and the walls are all one material. Then in the daytime, this is just a detail of that facade material where it starts to look like fabric. This is the fibers just coming across. And then in the evening, it becomes very mute. And then the window from the front. And then sort of the relationship at the back. Okay, then we go to a public project in London, so moving south. This is a project about a young man called Stephen Lawrence. Stephen Lawrence is a very important character in sort of recent British history. It's this man, this young boy here. He died when he was murdered when he was 18 by sort of a gang of sort of racist thugs, and his parents here. Stephen wanted to be an architect, so his story sort of touched the architectural community, touched me, touched a lot of people. His death, in the end, caused an inquiry to be held into, because basically his killers were found, but they were let free, and it caused a huge outrage in London, and it sort of eventually led, by the kind of single conviction of this couple to pursuing this, led them to kind of get an inquiry into the investigation, and it found that basically there was a huge report that came out which basically branded the British police force as being institutionally racist, which was a huge thing for the system to do. And it sort of more or less shifted the whole dynamic and relationship with the Afro-Caribbean and sort of the African descent community, and with London and its projection and image of itself, really. So what has also gone on since that was that Doreen Lawrence set up an educational institution, and Doreen's a teacher, and Doreen wanted to kind of carry on a space, or she's very much committed to this idea of education, really a space that would encourage and empower young kids of the diaspora to really, not necessarily, in the end now it's for any disenfranchised kids really, but to really have a space which can be an inspirational space to kind of develop this model of an educatorium, a high inspiration space which would nurture young teenagers to choose their chosen profession and to go into professions. Architecture is foregrounded because Stephen loved architecture in this place, but all the disciplines are also taught there as a sort of after curriculum activity for communities. So this is a prototype project. This is Deptford, another area which basically after people move from Whitechapel, they usually move to places like Deptford. This is one of the suburbs of London with its parks and neighbourhoods. Also always in these areas where these immigrant communities are, there are these incredible markets where these diasporic groups mix and interact. Incredible civic architecture. This is the architecture of the Victorian period. This is the architecture of our period, development. But it has this incredible history. I love this image. This is the creeks which really is the kind of the old history of London. So this is the Thames draining. The Thames drains to nothing, these canals, and then flooding again. And Deptford lies on this place where lots of warehouses were always built for these storage buildings and also modern warehouses. So there's a kind of warehouse industrial quality that's to the side. I'm trying to paint a picture for you where it's both industrial, it has this Victorian past, and it's kind of a new urban modernity. This is the park where the site is. This is the building that we were given as a site. This is an old pumping station, Victorian pumping station, which was burnt down, unfortunately, by, again, another strange group of thugs who... so this had to be taken down. It was structurally unsound. And the developer who built this bought all this land, and in a planning game to allow him to do this, had to give this to community, and then this was given to the Lawrences as the pilot site. What we didn't realize, the reason why this developer gave the site was that this really is the Victorian plumbing valve interchange for the entire community. So he didn't want to build here. And he was very happy to give this away. We inherited this, which is a bit of a nightmare, because the Lawrences didn't know about this. And we had to spend several months kind of doing a ton of surveys and sort of studies, really plotting all the pipes in this area. And in the end, what we've discovered is that if that was the parcel of land, we could basically build in this area here, and we could only build 3 stories in terms of planning, and the program required more. So I developed a strategy with the engineers where we'd build a second pavilion, but it would hover, and it would lean against the structure and act as a kind of this new sort of structural idea, which I'll show you in a minute. So it's this kind of very unusual building which looks very much as though it's just about itself. It actually comes from the way the site is set up, and also there's an urban context, and also this idea of, in the end, I wanted to make these buildings metal. These are Shanty gold boxes. Shanty gold boxes are architectural boxes, very much based on mimicking an architecture which contains gold or the essence, very precious things, which are kept sort of in shrines. So it's a sort of container, a sort of architecture as a kind of container of something very precious, which is very much the inspiration for this thing. So the site is this place by the creek in this park, divides into these 2 spaces, which hopefully makes a public plane. And this angle, which is generated by the site, but also is tuned to an urban situation, which is this, basically picks up on these 2 diagonals, which is the sort of infrastructure of the 60s, the city planning. This is a kind of Victorian terrace system, which basically ends abruptly because of this road, and in a way, hopefully, I'm hoping, is picked up by this geometry, which makes a public space here, a public gathering space for this composition. I'll just quickly go through the project. It's very simple. It's 2 spaces, again, one about thinking, sort of wet space, thinking, studio, performance. This is about digital and the sort of headquarters for the institution, and then a sort of public room on the roof again. I, on this project, also brought in Chris Ophelia, who I collaborate with quite a bit. And Chris was brought in to basically make on the main building a drawing of the facade. This is the main facade of that building. And this is a moire Chris developed from the project. Chris had an incredible relationship with this family because when Stephen died, Chris made a painting called No Woman, No Cry, which was dedicated to Stephen. And so there's kind of been this dialogue. So I wanted to complete that, and Chris came in to make this moire, which is a spiral which sort of resonates out, which relates to the material of the building and also to the side of the water and the site, which you'll see in a bit. This is the project from the railway. This is it here. It's mesh, and it's mesh turned in two directions. So it's opaque. It looks opaque, but it's actually just in a different direction. It's expanded mesh. So this is the folly here, which leans against the main building. And this is the structure. So this building really props against this, and so has no, it basically has one pile just going down, and this basically leans and stabilizes this structure because we couldn't anchor it down. So it's this quite unusual structure where they need each other to sort of to be. This is that approaching that front. This is Chris's drawing, which plays with the leaves. This is basically laminated, this is that just detail of the mesh. So the building practically atomizes as you get closer. It's sort of just, you see through it. The drawing is made from silver foil, which is laminated into the glass. This is just the building in the garden, just taking you around. It's just from the housing estate. I kind of like to rotate around my buildings. Sorry. So back to that entry. So this is silver foil, which is laminated, as I said. And then from the inside, this faces west. So actually it does something very special when the sun is out in London and in the evening. This is the sort of the making Sky Thinking building, and it's basically a solid concrete building which we just were able to perforate. I wanted to perforate at this moment as a connection back to the square. Otherwise, all the other spaces are top-lit because it's the one area structurally that we could open. And this is what it does to the foyer. So the drawing becomes a kind of live sort of flicker, playing with the dappling of light from the trees and then the sunlight. And this is that drawing from the inside, and it's backlit with these lights, so that in the evening the red intensifies, it becomes a kind of signal. You'll see that. This is a kind of giant foyer, because you imagine 100 kids turning up, you know, and it's basically the collecting space before they're just sort of dispersed into different rooms. Then the teaching space is very simple, again, a concrete frame building with very simple services, express concrete to deal with its thermal issues. Very utilitarian, flexible units so they can become auditoriums or not, always relating out. Color, then coding the way in which you kind of move through the spaces as a kind of thresholding system. So very much the color sort of punctuates and changes the way in which you kind of engage with the spaces. These are some of the teaching spaces. Then the link corridor to the making space. This is the studio space with that sort of perforation moment back to the court. This is just exposed concrete with plywood skylights, plywood lined skylights. Then studios in that space, recording studios and performance studios. Then the roof of that, this really being all the skylights which light this building. That's that building we've just been looking at. And then back upstairs, the public room, which you rise up a stair to or come up the lift. And this is a public common room, which sort of Lawrence's can have events, end of day breakouts, and it has this terrace, and there's that large cantilever basically looks at the two things. This is New London, this is Canary Wharf, and this is the new development. The canal is here, and the DLR is here. And then this is the Victorian past, is the other way around. Similar space. Here, where the pleasure gardens of the Victorian sort of planning is here with the canal. So you have these two moments which the roof sort of plays to with this diagonal shift. And then a little smoking area for the staff, which I really like. Very important terms. And that's, at night, it's sort of, you see that space, that space up here, and then the teaching room windows kind of reveal themselves. Because basically they're computer rooms, so we need to deal with glare, so the mesh basically acts as the blinds for the windows. And then in the evening, if you come, that's the backlit space. This is all coming down. This is from the old building, and it's all coming down, so this will be a sort of public plaza. Okay, let's look at the home again. This is another project. This one is for a photographer, a friend of mine, who had wanted to build a house with me for ages, and we'd sort of always talked about building a place together. But in the end, it didn't work, and he, this was somebody I've known for a very long time, and he came back to me and sort of said, "Look, David, I haven't got any money, but I really want to build a home with you, and let's try and do it." And I said, "It's not about money." And he said he wanted to build a prefab house, and I said, "That's interesting. What does that mean now? What is a prefab house?" So we basically researched. He found an amazing part of London, which is near Hoxton Square. This is actually very close to my studio. He was incredibly lucky. I'm just going to take you through Hoxton. This is Hoxton. This is the sort of new trendy part of London, where all the galleries are. It has just behind it these canals, which you keep seeing, but also the social housing of the 60s. But it has this incredible quarter, which was not bombed during the war. That part of the East End was bombed very heavily, so it was very much remade. But you have this incredible neighborhoods where this pattern architecture is completely intact and has become an incredibly desirable part of the city. Great homes. And but this place was built by builders as estates, so it wasn't really planned. It was about pattern books being rolled out. So with pattern books, nobody told you how to turn the corner. So you would crash one way, crash the other way. And there are all these funny gaps from an sort of architect's point of view. We're like, it doesn't work. Anyway, these two clients decided sort of to make some money, and decided to sell the ends of their gardens, which is kind of an extraordinary thing. And my friend managed to kind of get in touch with these people and bought this for a small amount of money. And came to me and said, can you get me planning permission? I seem to be the one that can, given the challenge of getting planning permission for strange, unusual sites. But anyway, the idea was to build a modern home in a very traditional area, which is, if you know anything about London, is not very easy. I proposed this volume, which is basically a very simple 3-story volume, prefabricated, made out of a laminated timber structure that would allow him to have sort of public room on the roof, sleeping, and then sort of dining and eating, and then a sort of spare space for renting in the basement. He's a photographer, so we set the house back so his van fits exactly here, steps up, the truck allows him to kind of put works into the space, large rollers and things in the space, and then a stair which takes you into this. So the whole house is a kind of little machine for a photographer. Sort of the section where you come in, and the void where you can stack and take things, and the stair takes you down to the ground and then up to the upper levels. It's the front elevation, a special door which opens so he can get things in and out. One window, which is this window which looks to a special view, and a tree which is being planted. This is that spare room. Sides, all the windows, the way we dealt with it is that none of the windows open, so the glazing north-south is fixed, and east-west you have these portholes, which are the ventilators, which cross-ventilate along the shortest side of the building. So you ventilate sideways, you have views the other way. It's another one of those elevations. And this is the large glass fixed units. This is the system, which is developed in Vienna, an amazing system. was put up in 4 days, just clipped together almost like foam core, those of you who are architects. And with all the apertures all made, and then we just clad it. It was the fastest project we've done. And it really defined a kind of way in which you could talk about prefabrication and bespoking, and bring those two worlds together. So it wasn't about a kit off the back, but it was about a system that you could assemble with the same speed as a sort of prefab house. The acoustics are amazing. It's incredibly dense, really solid. But this is going through a series of tests. At the moment, we wanted to leave this as it was, but for fire reasons, we couldn't as these tests get done. But we're working on another project where we're trying to solve that. So it's lined in fireproof material. But anyway, this is the project in this neighborhood. So we made this box, which sits here. It's a timber volume, and you'll see what it does. The windows at the back really enjoy this fantastic thing that happens with these estates, which is that you have these amazing gardens, which all the neighbors enjoy. And so, but usually what happens is that the living rooms are down here or in the front, so the bedrooms get this. So I wanted to kind of make a house where this aspect also is completely enjoyed. This is the house off the street. This is the front. It's as you drive up, I'm just going to take you around bedrooms. The staircase, this is that void, which then gives you this one moment where you see the entire section of the house from roof to the floor. It's made out of walnut plywood, the staircase, the kitchen downstairs. This is the sort of fixed window system and door. Courtyard, sorry it's a bit dark, but courtyard, this is a planter wall here. I don't know if you can see it, it's much better on my screen. The house has these passages right around it. It's freestanding volume inside this timber lining. The timber lines the ceiling, the walls, the floor, the fence. So it's almost one material which drapes and kind of creates the entire context. This is only 3 foot, which seems incredibly narrow, but it's actually incredibly amazing space when you're in it. These are these ventilators. So that moment where the rental bedroom is and the tree's going to be here. And then up. So there's a kind of second way down into the house where, if you have a rental, you can have your guests having their own entrance. So it's up that stair again into the living room. So the living room becomes a space which has this panorama window which just frames the trees. Sort of back. And it's just all about being in this treetop, almost like tree-like house. And you get just all this, which is divine. And it sort of closes off, and this is the building. And going back down, and that church is what's framed in this window, which you see from the stair. Which is a really beautiful church in the neighborhood. This window here, and that's the elevation, which draws light deep into the section, and becomes a kind of signal of the house. Okay. Another public project. I hope I'm not losing you. Rivington is an institution. This is Hoxton, which you've seen a little bit of, so I can speedily go ahead. Rivington Place is basically a project about a fantastic man called Stuart Hall, who, this is Stuart, basically single-handedly brought the idea of the diaspora, the creative arts in the diaspora, to the fore in Britain. It was really a spearhead, a support mechanism for a lot of artists that emerged, from Chris Ofili to Isaac Julian to all these characters really owe a debt to this man who was incredibly instrumental in putting an intellectual context to their work and also pushing the position of a kind of much more international agenda in the arts, from Europe anyway. This is really, after 15 years of being an agency without a home, the Arts Council gave them a grant to build a home. Stuart is the chair of 2 boards, a photographic agency as well as the visual arts agency, so Autograph is the second body. And this is really their home in London. It's in Hoxton Square, White Cube Gallery, those of you who are in the art world know, it's just here and it's just behind that. It's in Dickensian London, this is where Jack the Ripper hung out, apparently. There are tours, what we call blue tours, where people are standing going, this is where he was murdered, this is where he did quite sort of morbid sort of things. This project is really about this very narrow passage and about making quite a monumental institution in a very small place. It's a very modest project, but a very important one. The program is really to make gallery spaces, an archive, which for the institution, which has an amazing archive now, education spaces, multimedia spaces, offices, and rentable sort of studio for artists or like-minded organizations. The idea in this project was to make a body which basically dealt with perception. This is a very important Syrianese mask, ritual mask. But what I was very interested in was this notion of simple repeating units which distort and deal with perception and deal with form. So the triangles, this is a hand intuitively done thing, but this idea of a distortion from a simple unit to make multiplicity, this new way of perception, was very important. And this idea of a head, a body with this kind of repeating study was instrumental. The project organizes itself very simply as a stack of different heights and volumes which kind of arrange themselves up. So galleries on the ground, library, media rooms, etc., and studios going to the top. That kind of creates a moment where instead of coming in from the street front, I basically put this entrance in the middle, which articulates the ground plane. This is the public parts of that project, and this is the sort of offices up above. And also this becomes a private street, which eventually, when all this is finished, becomes the single address for this institution and this one building. So anyway, this becomes incredibly important later, which it isn't now. It's a sort of access road. And then the project wraps the system, which is basically about, on this multiple, this is showing you the different heights, sort of meeting rooms, etc. The sections of that. So it's a varying floor system. This is the entrance to that. Basically, the facade works by being a sort of half-meter module, which is on the south facade and flush, moving up to a 3-meter window. And almost also with the Georgian, this is a Georgian area, it expands vertically, it sort of compresses vertically. So the largest windows are in the public sphere, and the smaller windows are in the private sphere. And it works as a logarithmic compression that way, and a logarithmic expansion that way. So this is the south, which sets up the module flush, half a meter, and then the expansion occurs, and then the main window, which is the gallery. This is the building, made out of precast concrete. And this is the first purpose-built arts building in London after 40 years. It's extraordinary. All the arts buildings in London, since the Hayward Gallery, have been conversions of some sort. So this is, it was a kind of very symbolic project for the Arts Council. And in a way, concrete ended that discourse, and I wanted to bring concrete back to the conversation. So this is about concrete now. This is dye-injected concrete with lacquer metal. These house the services for each space. 2 sets of windows define a floor, even in the expansion. So public and then decreasing. This is from the south and the street. This is the flush facade, which just finishes street context, and then the building. Then you see it, like all things, the perspective, you see the distortion when you go to the end. But when you're back here, you think it's fine. That's where it's done. And then the entrance, the atrium, which is this triple height space, no lights in the ceiling. The facade system acts as a blind system. These are light boxes which light the atrium to localize the light, and then has these kind of moments. Sorry, it's the gallery space, which has this absolute connection to the street. It's 20-foot high space. And turns. So looking back, it's just set up as an anteroom and then a main room, which is a cube. Then sort of reception space. Sort of atrium stair. Sort of you're always going around this triple height space, which is where the library, the exhibition spaces, the education spaces are all sort of situated, and they all connect into this void. So as you go around, you have these incredible multiple views. So it's the education space where the windows frame the context. This is absolutely specifically framed. It's a very important 80s graffiti artist that is well known. Then sort of round again, sort of from the meeting spaces back. Then a sort of multi-use space, which is basically a projection space which has a retractable seating system which closes down, or it can become an auditorium, sort of what they call rapid fire auditoriums, like 80 people. Somebody comes into town, there's a kind of debate with an intimate group, or turns into this kind of thing, which is a media space. This is the show at the moment. It's a Mona Hatoum piece. And then the offices. The library first. This is the main library space, where the shelving system alternates with the window system, and you have this kind of almost the principal room, almost like a sort of it's vertical. So I wanted to show this is just as they are moving in. So this idea of the windows and the seats, turning the corner. And then the offices. And as you go up, you see the windows change from the vertical to these squares, and then fall away. And then you see where the blanks are, these air conditioning units. Sort of the corner. Then the roof with that sawtooth which expands as well, but it's not about Northlight, it's about a reference to this area which became an industrialized space, sort of an industrial space, and skylights which have one lens but they're splayed. Okay, and then that's Rivington. So that's back from the entrance. And then at night. So this is the last two projects. I'm going to show this, and then Bernie Grant. Bernie Grant, very controversial character in London. Very much an MP, first MP to enter Parliament, first black MP. So a very symbolic character. Very radical ideas. He had incredible radical ideas about African preparation, and it was very much criticized for these sort of opinions, but also was an incredible community activist for the borough of Tottenham. This is Tottenham, which is North London. But what he was great at was noting that this part of London was basically an important neighborhood, which basically had been the place where most of the actors that were on sort of all the soap operas and television somehow all seemed to, a large percentage came from this borough, which was kind of extraordinary. And the music, the urban music that was coming out of London in the 90s and 80s came from this borough. And the reggae sound systems were all sort of, a lot of them were sort of generating from this area. So this place, which had this kind of peripheral character, Bernie wanted to celebrate as being an important creative hub and not just something that was underground. And so this is the community, this is Tottenham. Wanted to kind of, before he died, he passed away 5 years ago from a terrible liver problem that he had. But this is the neighborhoods, the suburban neighborhoods. But he wanted to basically, as his legacy, he wanted, the last thing he was setting up was this performing arts center for the community. Performing arts centers usually traditionally are in the centers of the city, and London is no exception. And the idea was, for Bernie, was that, it was, the sort of, the local person would not go to the center for the theater, and why couldn't we bring that resource, especially to Tottenham, because Tottenham is a place where this incredible creative arts sort of class exists, and not only should we have a theater for performance, but we should have it as a place which nurtures teaching. So it's a theater, an education space for teaching creative arts, and an incubator place for giving subsidized rent to the young businesses from the creative arts to start for a year and to see if they can kind of make it into their chosen profession. It's the site that we were given for the project is in front of this green. This is the classic sort of Victorian architecture, Victorian Edwardian architecture of that time, 100 years ago. This is a civic space, which is in front of that green I was showing. This is a collection of buildings here to build a college, a bathhouse for the community to wash, a town hall to discuss, and a fire station. There's the kind of, and this is all made in this grand palatial style, and this is not stone but stucco. So it's this sort of the high art brought down, but very much a kind of very elegant Edwardian architecture. And this is this ensemble here with a green in front of it, which sets up the community. And then as time has gone on, leisure centers have been built here and new colleges, etc. But it's always been very much about this facade, this frontal. And our site, which is the Bath House, which is a very long shed originally, I sort of master planned into the strategy of turning the facade into a three-dimensional site where you would activate a new kind of engagement with the whole thing. The front would be the education building and box office. The middle would be the theatre, and the end bit would be the enterprise training centre. And you would have this new public space, pedestrian public space away from the traffic, which the colleges could use and spill out onto and would become a sort of urban campus. Really, this is just showing the diagram about the project, which is basically to turn this into a kind of site that has this multiplicity. This idea of a mat underlying the whole thing was very much the important strategy in this, that there was a sort of strategy which would set up the buildings as a composition on this landscape, but also this mat reinforces the end thing, which is the place for the theatre, the place of performance. This is just going through this sort of diagram. Again, I don't know if you know about London, but these are very important things. We had to basically the structures, all the structures had to be below this little building here, which is the sort of listed. This is a listed composition, so we had to kind of prove that this form couldn't be seen from the park. So this geometry is more or less generated from the sort of sightline strategy to kind of, get this. And really, so in the end, what we're allowed to have is basically open the ends of this. We took away these little folly buildings, which were built later, to make two cavities, which then open up the urban possibility, and then release the potential of the site to the back, where you have a large sort of open window, which is the rehearsal spaces, etc., and the enterprise spaces, which make a new sort of space at the back. This is looking at the main building. What we did was to take out the original front bath doors and to make a new entry into the space, which connects into a new foyer, which then connects to the classrooms, which are sort of off this level. So I'm going to try and go through this quite quickly, but sorry. So classroom spaces, and then essentially the form of the building is another exact replica of the front building, but laminated onto the back as a sort of beam, and it's basically clad in black ceramic tiles and has one aperture which connects through to those three arches at the front, which then frames the view to this pedestrian space, which then connects to the theatre. So you get this is the tile building and the sort of brick building. And then the main theatre, we'll go back to the backspace, to the training. This is the enterprise training space, which is a long beam. The form of that is really set up from the geometry we found of the site. There was an old building here, which is a long storage building, which is exactly that proportion. And we wanted to re-establish that as a figure back again to set up this idea of potentially reorganizing, sorry if you saw it from the site plan, a square, making a square back in this rear area. Building is clad in fiberboard, and it's basically flexible, rentable units, very simple cells with a dance space in front, which is this one for rehearsal, and then just simple rooms which are for rent, which basically the game here was to have every room have its own specificity, so each window, no window system repeats, but they always change, so that each room is specific to its user. Very cheap building, but very simple strategy. The corridor system, this is the corridor area, which is very simple and mute, and then this is the details. Then the main elevation, which will face the square, is where all the studios are. And then you see the back of the main theatre. This is where the rehearsal rooms and green rooms all face this main square, and this is going to become a main square with new developments sort of around it. The theatre building is very simple. It's a foyer
which acts as a flexible performance space, an informal performance space, a formal performance box, which has no proscenium, but we developed this new system with a fantastic theatre consultant, where basically you have a stainless steel mesh ceiling, which has all the lighting and rig systems up above it, so that you can basically light and organize a performance in any part of the space. Then rehearsal spaces at the back.
That's the first time it's been done in London. This is the building, so in a way through the first aperture into the second one.
And then you get the second, so you've come through that into that.
This is the entrance into that. The building is clad on the outside in aluminium and on the inside with a purple heart timber, which is the timber that is a timber from Guyana, and it's a timber that the whole of Georgetown in Guyana is built from, and Bernie Grant came from Guyana, so it's a kind of reference to him. Then this is the foyer space, which is set up. It's designed as a series of cast concrete sort of projecting boxes. It's almost like a theatre, but in reverse, looking back at you. And it sort of becomes a kind of landscape of stairs and ramps. This is the ground floor sort of scenario into the theatre with bars. And sort of it's really a loop around this foyer space, which you sort of go around this casting, and then you can go up the casting. Everything is cast and then washed in this soft paint, grey paint. And then the roof, the timber just comes into the space acoustically and folds down to the entrance, and it's just sealed. So you have these ramps, and then these become almost like little balconies for the idea is that this can have cinema or performance, or this can be tented over to have events underneath here. So in a way, the foyer is a kind of landscape of possible encounters, possible sort of small performance gathering spaces. The main theatre, it's kind of wasn't completely finished, but we took the photos anyway. This project's just finishing now. This is a flexible, retractable sort of seating system that allows it to be a box or not. This is that gantry system,
which is basically an amazing thing. We're looking down into the auditorium, and this is what the technicians walk all over. And set up everything, and it's extraordinary when you see people sort of above your head. But it's an amazing thing, and they need special training to get used to this idea of being up here. But when it works, it's really amazing.
And then the green rooms. And then the rehearsal room, which is at the back, which will face the square. Looking back to the training spaces, and that's that facade, which will face the square, so that's the sort of second elevation. Then the building, which is just looking at the skin, we kept one piece of sort of the auditorium. We kept the chimney, the old chimney, which was basically connected to an underground stream, which we discovered, which basically deals with the air conditioning for this building, which we use, well, the heating and cooling for the building by using a heat sink, which cools the building from that stream. This is just the facade of that building. It's just extruded aluminium. And then the entrance. This is kind of what it's an evening space, so this is really what it's always like. And then I wanted to talk about our project that we are looking at here, which I'll end with. So this is a project we have been working with an amazing group called Wingfield, who you found out all about. And we're working at the moment on completing Wingfield's headquarters building in Brussels, and Wingfield is now working extensively in America, and Dean Johnson comes from St. Paul's, so has been working very actively on an amazing set of ideas about sort of moving, developing St. Paul's, developing new types of architecture, new types of topology, public realm projects for St. Paul's, which I think are really inspiring. Wingfield asked us to really look at developing a site on 6th and Wabashaw in downtown Minneapolis to look at a mixed-use public realm tower. This This will be my first tower if we do this. It looks like we're going to start next year. It's really, I wanted to really look at the idea of a tower as a kind of geology of a place, to look at the sort of history of a place. So this is just a kind of aerial view of obviously St. Paul's, and the sort of cultural quarter from sort of Rice Park going sort of to where our site is back here. And this idea of a site where the history of the city, it's kind of, its horizontals and its verticals are somehow acknowledged into the project, and also the trajectory of its corridors, its commercial and cultural trajectories are sort of brought into a place. First very important thing was really to look at the way in which the skywalk network connects to the public infrastructure, and to see this as a very much connected to that skywalk network, and to then see that level as an opportunity to make a cultural facility directly off that skywalk, which connects both from the ground and into that sort of other public space. The project then sets up a strategy from taking lead from this pedestrian sort of handscape between St. Peter's and Wobbershaw, which basically is where the ham building is, and where these incredible the sort of jazz, the artisanal sort of quarter has sort of established itself, and to try and kind of propose, these are just still strategies, but to propose on the ground plane a project which elevates itself and makes two qualities of court, of this hard court, a sort of open atrium, a sort of a courtyard in the city, a respite here, which also can act as a kind of collector to the auditorium, and then a landscape in this other side of 6th Street. So really these two strategies which also are linked on the ground plane, and then connected in the middle by the skywalk into a public zone. So we're defining this as a potential for a community project. We've shown it as an auditorium, but the idea is that it could be a showing space, an auditorium, and we want to, Wingfield are actively talking to the community about what kind of infrastructure we can bring here, but this idea of bringing a community infrastructure here is incredibly important to the nature of this project. Then the ground plane here, this, if Wobbershaw is really understood as a kind of important commercial corridor for the city, then we bring in the office and retail space on the ground, and entrances to a hotel which sits at a higher level here, which basically is also establishes a public plate, a sort of a landscape plate at that level, which is the hotel entry, and then finally a residential plate which has its own facilities and a sort of tower which is in the air. So in a way, the building takes its cues from the sort of architecture, the height line of the ham building as one datum, the ground plane as another datum, this height which corresponds to the early towers that were in St. Paul's, and then the new skyline of St. Paul's really being acknowledged by the third element. So in a way, hopefully the city, the sort of geology of the city, this is our tower here, this idea of a kind of reading of the city as this frequency which is then acknowledged in these three splits with the building, which sort of in a way it becomes a kind of register. It's the project. So you have this moment where you have the pedestrian plane, which picks up into the urban atrium. The project is conceived basically as a solar collector. This is really a strategy about using a south facade as a photovoltaic elevation which collects energy. So it's a kind of energy collecting building which then powers the public parts of this project. And also then becomes an architectural device which oscillates horizontally and vertically to set up a potential sort of dialogue about how the building can be perceived in the city, so the lines of the city are being acknowledged. And on the edges of these louvers, which deal with solar shading, etc., and energy, we develop a color reflectivity and energy. So we want to kind of develop a system where there's a nuanced color that sort of is red, sort of when you come close to the building, which just articulates the different functions of the building in terms of program as we develop it. So this is still very early, and I know these are kind of quite developed renderings, but it's just to give you, we wanted to kind of show you what's going on. And then underneath the tower, really understanding the residential component, the hotel from one of the gardens. One of those public planes, this is that upper level where the hotel foyer might be and a public park might be, or sort of open space. The landscape space, the courtyard space on the other side, connecting to retail on the ground. The entrance off Wobbershaw, the sort of hotel entrance and the sort of public, and the connection to the skywalks.
maybe an auditorium. Somebody said this looked very like something you already have. And then this is the project. So this is the idea of this public atrium, this courts on the grounds, the connection, this civic commercial realm, this new hotel realm, and this hopefully amazing residential space. And this community, this sort of mixed-use tower, which sort of celebrates the kind of the history and the qualities of St. Paul's, which I hope will add to that place. Thank you.
I think we have time for a few questions. We have two runners in the aisle. We'd just like to capture a question on the microphone because we're archiving and webcasting the presentation tonight. We'll edit out that little glitch.
Technology, don't you love it? Maybe we're all tired. Maybe we're going to have a beer.
David?
Yeah.
Right here, James. Hey. I just had a quick, question. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to, I've noticed a lot of the cladding on your facades are sort of very rich, dark materials, and a lot of your interiors tend to be very well articulated, bright colors. And I'm just wondering, it's just kind of a theme that I've noticed. I'm just wondering if you could sort of expound on that a little bit.
I'm sort of very interested in sort of the reality of metropolitan urban life. I'm sort of very interested in the idea that the city is what it is, and that actually the qualities that I'm interested in as an architect come directly from that. So for me, something dirty or something clean is not really interesting. And the idea of always this idea that you make a pristine thing is not very interesting either. So I'm very interested in this idea that you make an architecture which is not, I think we've had, modernism's tried to do that, the kind of pristine crystal. I'm very interested in that kind of idea of the kind of the city after this model, and this idea that somehow it's made from, the stuff that's somehow seen to be not precious, not valuable, outside of the thing. So I kind of like very much this idea of working against the kind of perceived kind of ideas about what you should do and what you should look like. So it's kind of very much this discourse about, and in the private projects is very much about this idea of retreat, almost invisibility. So the sort of darkness becomes a kind of way of kind of neutralizing, becoming silhouette, but incredible light inside, incredible perception. And then in the public projects, it becomes about actually the kind of maximizing of the sort of what I call the porosity, the textural quality of it, in order to kind of start to kind of absolutely imbricate with context. So they're kind of, for me, two strategies for how you absolutely manifest that's public realm and how you manifest the private realm, drawn from this idea of the reality of the place that I see. I mean, obviously through my eyes, if that helps. Okay.
Hi, David. I'm very interested in the way you use cultural and historical reference points in your work. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm very invested in. I'm very invested in knowledge systems which kind of give new ways of looking, not just traditional canons of architecture, but I'm also very deeply invested in artifacts from ancient cultures, only because the artifacts for me are remnants of. What I love about them is that all these artifacts actually come from highly ritualized cultures, and ritual cultures, have elaborate, complex cultural public lives. And they're summarized in these objects, actually. We look at these objects and we kind of see them as decorative objects or whatever, or, beautiful artifacts. But actually, it's a synthesis of incredibly complex things into iconic, reduced, powerful forms. And I use them as my tropes, as my thinking systems. They help me dive. Yeah.
Are there any reference points in St. Paul that influenced the design of that building? And
I said.
Note some of them.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the important thing I was very struck by the way St. Paul's is. I didn't use any architecture of the city specifically, but very much the urban quality of the city. I was very interested in actually manifesting within the project this idea that the urban landscape can really inform a strategy for a sort of forward-looking, a new project in the city. So it's not about repeating the strategy of just kind of, we've seen a tower, let's build another tower, but maybe the archaeology of the city, this idea of it being built as a low city, then progressively becoming a city which has this incredible sort of pinnacle in the center, could be a registering system and a way of actually talking about an architecture which registers and adds to the city. So I very much wanted to stay away from specific architecture, but wanted to take on the idea of St. Paul's as a place, encapsulated in the project. I mean, somebody in the back.
David, I'm curious as to how much you've played a role in helping to shape some of the briefs, especially the projects in London, where you mentioned the Idea Centre in Whitechapel is really a kind of new typology, a new mixing of public facilities.
Yeah.
How much do you see that being a part of your role from here on? Or is it just a general piece of an architect's job, or do you happen to be lucky with the clients that you're getting?
No. I've had to work really hard with my clients. I'm very much the most successful projects are the ones where, brought in right at the beginning. So developing the strategies for the building informed, in the end, the sort of projects, the idea of it sort of defined the institution's kind of agenda to its public. So in a way, what's important in the way I work is that ability to co-author with the client. So it's very important to be able to co-author with the client, because then I'm able to kind of feed that agenda to the project. So the projects are all very much about relationships. I've been very lucky enough to have those relationships, and that's the sort of thing I seek in the commissions that I get, is the ability to have relationships with my clients, so there's a dialogue with whoever the end kind of person is, to be able to kind of feed the project with the kind of qualities of public, especially the public projects. The private ones, you have the client. Yeah. But yes, it's very difficult to say they were never documents that were just handed and delivered as buildings. Great. Thank you very much.